Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, OP becomes suspicious of his wife when she starts volunteering at a non-profit organization, which is out of character for her. He overhears a coworker talking about someone his friend met at the same organization, and his suspicions grow when he sees that person's social media profile. When he comes home unexpectedly, he confronts his wife and catches her in the act of cheating with the person from the non-profit. He decides to end the marriage and starts dating again, feeling grateful for a second chance at love. Now let's get into the story. I started to suspect something was going on with my wife when she started volunteering at a non-profit organization. She was never into doing anything that could be called work. She basically got paid to be silly and goofy in videos that she made at home. I guess she had a pretty big online presence, which worked out well for her because she didn't like leaving the house. When she started volunteering in a place that took 25 minutes to drive to, that was out of character for her. Even driving to the grocery store 5 minutes away was enough time away from home. I was listening to someone at work talk about their friend, who met this pretty woman at a part-time job he worked at. I really wasn't paying any attention, but to be nice, I asked where he worked. When he said the name of my wife's nonprofit, my ears perked up. I asked if he had a picture of this woman, but he said no. He showed me AP's profile on social media, and there it said, in a relationship, but it didn't specify who. My wife's profile always said the same thing, because I didn't have a page. I had a hunch this was fate telling me my wife was cheating. The guy didn't know what his friend's girlfriend's name was either. A part of me wondered why he tried gossiping if he didn't have all the information. I decided to leave work early. My wife mentioned having a few people from the non-profit at the house today, but they'd be gone before I got home. Now since I was leaving early, I'd get there before them. When I walked in the door, my wife's face went pale. She stammered to ask me what I was doing at home, and was being hurriedly sweet, asking if I needed anything. I was so amused that I could see her panic. I knew she was cheating on me. She never behaved like this, and was about to have someone at the house. At this moment, I owed my gossipy coworker thanks for any future happiness I found with my next partner. I took my time lingering in the hallway by the front door while my wife sweated bullets. I told her I had a stomach ache, so I wanted to see what she was up to. She looked like she wanted to scream at me to go back to work, but she couldn't. She bit her tongue and said the non-profit people would be here any minute, so I might want to go upstairs or get somewhere a little less boring. I told her no thanks, that I wanted to see what they were up to. I even asked if we could all play Jenga or poker. She was so frustrated, I couldn't help but laugh. She asked what was so funny, and I laughed more. I said nothing, and then the doorbell rang. I rushed to answer it, but my wife was faster. She blocked the door, standing with her back against it. She said she was embarrassed of her friends because they weren't half as cool as me. I laughed hard, but I was getting annoyed. She was lying through her teeth, trying anything to keep me from discovering the truth. I fake bolted to go for the back door, and while my wife was in full momentum that way, opened the front door. There was a very confused and scared man looking at me. The same one I saw on the profile. I introduced myself as my wife's husband, and asked what he was looking for. My wife appeared by the door, looking even more uncertain and panicked than he was. I laughed out loud, and said they were both scared little dip crabs. I said I knew what was going on between them, and my wife needed to leave. AP turned to go, and my wife stepped back inside the house, dropping to her knees. No sound came out of her mouth, but she was sobbing. I yelled for AP to look at her now. He did, then drove away quickly. At this moment I knew I made a terrible mistake marrying her. I was always a very hardworking and reasonable person, and opposites attract, so I married a lazy jokester that didn't know what she wanted out of life. She begged me not to leave her or make her leave. She was scared and had nowhere else to go since we'd been married for 11 years and lived states away from her relatives. I told her that wasn't my problem, and that there are resources out there for sleazy women like herself. People would always be willing to lend a hand to a pitiful woman in need. I pushed her and her stuff out the door and locked it. We had 2 cars, but they were both mine, so I didn't give her one. She found somewhere to go with the use of her smartphone because she was gone in a few hours. I don't know if this was the only time she cheated on me or not, but regardless, I'm glad I discovered the truth. I made my coworker a thank you for your big mouth basket. My ex only ever contacted me to beg me for stuff. I never gave her anything, and she still survived, no matter how tough it was. It's been a while since she got a ride back to the state her relatives lived in. I don't know who she still had contact with since their relationship was never great, and she'd been away for 11 years. I've managed to start dating again, and am just happy to be alive, and given a second chance at finding love. Today's second story. In this story, a couple in their 40s, childless by choice, faced upheaval when their home flooded. Seeking refuge with the husband's self-sufficient brother on a farm, the wife became infatuated with the lifestyle and cheated on her husband. The husband caught them in bed, resulting in a divorce. He informed their families, receiving support from his mother, while the wife's mother disowned her. She briefly stayed with the brother but was eventually kicked out. The husband is slowly forgiving his brother and rebuilding his life, renovating his home, and finding solace in socializing, though the pain of betrayal endures. Now let's get into the story. My wife 40 and I 43 were married for 12 years. We never felt ready for children, and I guess that's a good thing because of the story I'm about to tell you. Our house unexpectedly flooded, so during the repairs my older brother 48 was kind enough to let us stay at his house with him and his dogs. He was kind of like a doomsday prepper and didn't believe in marriage or commitment. My wife was fascinated by his lifestyle and admired all the hard work he put into maintaining his self-sufficient farm. I think she was tired of living the usual life and just needed some change. Well, instead of talking to me about it and making a good change, she made a change without asking me. A change that would ruin our marriage. I was sleeping in the guest room when I woke up in the early morning hours to find my wife gone. The night before we all drank and sat talking by a fire. We'd been staying here for 5 days at this point and we didn't know how long our stay was going to be. I started tiptoeing through the house trying not to wake up my brother, who was a light sleeper in the event of an intruder or emergency. My brother was already awake. His dogs were lined up at the crack of his door, smelling intent to deduce what was going on inside. I heard a quiet movement, but before I knocked, I thought it would be smart to see if I could see under his door because I heard some noises. I could see his bare feet and legs up against the side of the bed, shifting his weight in a way that meant intimacy. I felt myself knock on the door as I watched underneath. I saw my wife's feet drop down in a hurry and step into the nightgown that lay on the floor. I could hear her whispering, "Oh my God," because she probably didn't know how they were going to explain themselves. I heard my brother opening the many door locks and he greeted me. I was standing now and he was sweating. He looked really nervous. I think it was much harder for him to face me after having intimate with my wife than he thought. He couldn't look me in the eye, and all he said was he was showing my wife the closets full of guns and non-perishable food. I punched him pretty hard. He fell back and grabbed his face. I told him he wasn't my brother anymore. Then I looked at my wife and told her she wasn't my wife anymore. I said I saw them under the door and they each had complete disregard for me. I left to return home and inform both families of this betrayal. It was extremely difficult, but after I told my mom, things instantly became easier. She cried with me and understood how upset I was. She said she was going to sound my brother, which gave me the idea to call my MIL. She didn't want to believe it, but she did offer my apologies and gave me some advice. Moments later, my wife called me. She said her mother was disowning her because I told her what happened. I asked her if she thought she deserved this and she was quiet. She got bitter and said since I turned her mother against her, she'll just keep my brother instead of me. I laughed and said my brother wouldn't keep her for more than a month. Turns out my brother kicked her out 17 days later. He said he felt horrible for what he'd done to me, and it took him all this time to realize he would only ever see her as my wife. He said he hated himself for doing this and never wanted to commit to a woman in the first place. He left a voicemail with his whole account of the breakup because he wanted me to forgive him. My wife also continued to beg and plead for forgiveness. I might forgive my brother, but it will take me a while. I'm happily divorced and living in the house that I've repainted and remodeled. It looks completely different, and I know the woman I used to know would have enjoyed this very much, but it's not hers to enjoy anymore. I've had lots of company over and even hosted parties, which is something I never used to do. It's still very painful to know what my wife did to me by doing my best to take it day by day and focus on other things in life. Today's third story. In the story, Opie's wife's mysterious behavior at work leads to suspicion and the discovery of a romantic involvement during a fire drill. Confrontation ensues with a coworker, revealing the affair and leading to the lover's eviction. the wife's erratic behavior escalates with a destructive outburst. He decides on divorce, met with initial resistance. Months later, the wife reaches out, regretful and struggling with self-worth. He advises her to improve herself and treat others with respect and love. He moves forward, realizing that being single isn't as daunting as he once believed. Now let's get into the story. One day while my wife was at work, something happened that made her see one of her coworkers in a different, more romantic light. I didn't know it when it happened. I only noticed that she was really giggly and happy when she came home from work. I thought she was pleased with her new position and pay. She wouldn't tell me about anyone she met at work. She worked there for an entire year and never told me about anybody. She did mention that it was the first time she attended a fire drill and it felt real. That was not very interesting, but I pretended it was and asked her more questions. She was just vague about the rest, but she started to blush. So I took this as a chance to ask her why she never told me about work. She was surprised I asked and seemed offended for some reason. She said she didn't think she had to report everything to me. That was a red flag. I told her she didn't, but I'd think she'd want me to be involved with her work life, at least by her telling me things she liked or didn't like. I mentioned how she knew all the guys I worked with at the garage because she came by often for lunch. My wife allowed me little room for privacy and even checked my phone often. I didn't care, I had nothing to hide, but she never asked if I wanted to look at her phone. When I became suspicious that she was hiding something at work, I asked her if I could look at her phone. She told me she left it at work and left immediately, despite my objection. While she was gone, I looked on her Facebook and searched for her friends. There were only 3 girls that worked with her. I decided to message one, begging her not to tell my wife anything. I needed to know if there was anything romantic going on between my wife and someone in the office. She replied in a most shocking way. She was apologetic and said she didn't know my wife was married. She saw that during a fire drill at their office, a man that spoke daily to my wife played a romantic rescuer and swept her off her feet to carry her down 4 flights of stairs after her high heel broke. I expressed my shock to this woman and literally physically felt my heart breaking. I didn't want to believe it, but I didn't think she'd lie to me. I asked her how often the super guy spoke to my wife. She reaffirmed daily. I felt terrible because this guy sounded heroic and desirable. This was probably why my wife had been so giggly and didn't want to let me look at her phone. She didn't get home until really late, and she smelled different. She acted guilty and distant, even though she was willing to hand me her phone because she had all that time to delete whatever she wanted. She asked for my phone, and even though I was heavily considering divorce, I didn't care. I let her look, and she got mad at me for the conversation with the woman at her job. She added that her coworker was lying, but I think that was because she felt she had to say that. I told her I didn't believe a word she said and pointed out that she smelled like another man. Of course, she said it was because she went to her dad's house for a while, but I didn't believe her because of how odd her behavior was. Just then my phone rang. My wife handed it to me slowly, probably wondering if she should let me answer it. It was someone I worked with at the garage. He said he knew his call was really unexpected because we never spoke before, but he wanted to tell me something he felt I needed to know. I pleaded with him to continue on speakerphone. My wife looked extremely on edge, like she just knew it was going to be about her. He said he had a roommate that worked at a company that my wife also worked at. He said the guy had been talking about a girl he started an office romance with, but he didn't realize it was my wife until tonight. When she came over and went upstairs for 3 hours, my wife started yelling that it was bull. Even before he finished his sentence, she swore up and down it wasn't her, and my coworker actually yelled back at her that it was and called her some really despicable things. I was blown away yet again. This was a terrible night. I asked him if I could. And he welcomed me. He said he would kick out his roommate immediately for what he did. My wife was disturbed to hear that her AP just lost his place to live. On top of it, she took off her wedding rings and stared at the absent mark on her finger. She was about to boil over and the most upset I had ever seen her. She started screaming, shoving stuff off shelves and the kitchen counters. A ton of stuff broke by left. I didn't give a crap and I didn't want her to turn on me. The more of a mess it was, the more likely she wouldn't bring AP over. I had some man-to-man time and made an unexpected friend in my coworker. We only talked for the first few minutes about what my wife did, then we changed to distracting and entertained topics for my sanity. By the morning, I had decided to divorce. This was something I never expected my wife to do, and I needed to place my trust in someone else. She wasn't even apologetic. Her behavior was rampant and she destroyed things in her craziness. When I gave her the papers, she acted like she didn't care, but also said she wouldn't sign them. I waited 2 months and she actually returned them to me at work, probably so she could embarrass me or find another man's attention or something. I didn't believe her intentions were innocent. AP hadn't been back to work, probably because he had no choice but to move far away. I guess my wife had to clean up her mess at the house all on her own. It was 4 months after that my wife called me, sobbing. She said she hadn't been with anyone and was struggling to forgive herself or feel worthy. I wasn't sure what to say because she certainly broke my heart and acted like a fool. I simply told her she needed to improve who she was. She needed to stop behaving like an entitled, angry girl and treat the man she wants in her life with respect and love. She should behave like she would want to be treated. I told her I thought she already knew this, but it wasn't too late for her to learn and behave properly. I've since moved on and have started getting used to the single life. Being single isn't as bad as people make it seem. Here are my thoughts on the situation. I'm really sorry that you had to go through this betrayal. It's always tough, but it's almost like karma that your wife started feeling unworthy after making you feel the same way. It's fortunate that you had a supportive friend and coworker who informed you about what was happening. It's a small world indeed. It's never acceptable to let another romantic interest enter your life when you've committed to someone else. Thanks for sharing your story. It serves as a good reminder for people about the importance of staying loyal and open in their relationships.